Hi there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to yet another cracking installment of the Matt Brown Show. Today, we are joined from Austin, Texas by Peter Newell. He is a Silver Star recipient. He was a colonel in the U.S. military for 32 years. He is the real deal, done some amazing stuff in the U.S. military, and today he is the CEO of BMNT, which is an innovation-focused business or group. And he's just doing some amazing work with hacking for defense programs over in the US, and just so much to get into. But for our viewers and audience around the world, Peter, who potentially haven't heard about you, why don't you kick us off, give us the elevator pitch, tell us what we need to know.
The idea of introducing entrepreneurship into groups of people to allow them to create a mission for themselves is something that we built BMNT to do. So oftentimes I tell people that BMNT is less a company than it is a collection of really brilliant people who are driven by the idea of making the world a better, safer place, one problem at a time.
Okay, cool. So let's get into that. So obviously the word mission is very associated with obviously military. I would actually equate, although I've never been in a battle situation, my father has. He was in the military for also around 25 years or so. But I would equate to business and the military being similar in some respects, only there's no bullets in the world of business.
No.
Yeah. But what exactly is mission-driven entrepreneurship?
No, I think you're right on. It takes, I think, the best of both worlds, of the business world and the military, and focuses people on, what we consider to be a mission, which is, whatever problem you want to take on. Our tendency is to focus on the really hard ones, both in terms as a way to gather, really brilliant people around something and accelerate the work they do to actually see something be solved. But oftentimes, as you know, being a startup founder, if you don't have a sense of mission as a startup founder, your startup flounders rather than grows. If you go after something in your life without a sense of mission, it tends to flounder or meander. So the idea of having a mission to focus people on is what gets you the ability to collapse socially the right people in a tight concentric circle to work on something. We have focused on entrepreneurship for years because we understood essentially the principles of lean, that Steve Blank and Eric Rice and others have promulgated, combined with the work that Alex Osterwalder did, really provided the best blueprint for how to pick apart something, and actually how to very rapidly do a discovery around whether you're working on the right problem, or whether you have the right people, or whether you actually have a solution or a pathway to deliver it. That discipline lent a great deal of rigor to this concept of, I have a mission to solve a problem or to make the world a better place. How do I actually do that? And turn that into a patternable activity that either drives my life, or drives my company, or drives another group of people. So we've settled on mission-driven entrepreneurship really is the collection of activities that you can actually teach people to do that allows them to take on bigger, harder things and actually see progress made.
Great stuff. Thank you so much for that, Peter. I want to quickly maybe go back in time and talk to you about the genesis of kind of your experience in, where we're going to go in this conversation today. So I think it's important for our audience to kind of stick with us as we kind of tell this story. So if you cast your mind back 30 odd years ago, what actually made you join the Army? What was that spark that led to you joining?
I would say it's less a possession and more an act of survival. I was a bored student in high school. I was not a good student, and it's not because I'm not smart. Maybe I'm not. But it was because I was bored sitting in a classroom listening to rote learning. I'm somebody that thrives on experiential problem solving, and so the classroom wasn't a great fit for me. So when I transitioned to college, I obviously did not do well. It got to the point that I had to make a living, was running out of money, and I joined the Army National Guard, which is, the reserves in the United States, as a private. I enlisted when I was 18 years old in order to earn money to continue to go to college. And what I learned over the 5 years that I was in the National Guard while going to school was that I was enamored with a dynamic environment where I was solving things on a constant basis. There was constantly a challenge, and it was hard. And so my decision to stay in the military and become a commissioned officer, I would say, is really just an extension of I enjoyed what I was doing, and I just stayed there. I never really intended to make a career out of it. I just stuck with it for a while.
Well, you obviously did a great deal of good there. So I want to quickly talk to you around the period 2010 to 2013. So this is where, Pete, you actually led the REF, right? So the Rapid Equipping Force. And you made, from my understanding at least, invested over 1.4 billion in developing solutions to soldiers' most pressing needs. And the soldiers' needs were, as from my understanding again, so I'm going to ask you to maybe fill in the blanks for me, but the responsibility there was to rapidly find, integrate, and employ solutions to emerging problems as they face them on the battlefield. So it's a pretty pressurized environment. So maybe if you could, in your own words, just explain exactly what was the role of the REF there, because I think it's a really important springboard into where we're going to go today.
So at the time, I spent my career as an infantryman. So my introduction to the RAF, I would say, was probably the most likely candidate to run an organization like that. There wasn't a science. I wasn't an acquisition officer. And the idea of taking somebody who's been an infantryman for forever and suddenly giving him the keys to what I call the Ferrari of Skunk Works. And you consider, I had a $150 million budget and 100 people, only one boss in the Army, and I was told just to go find problems and solve them as fast as I possibly could in terms of days, not months and years, and report back to the Army what problem I found and why the Army wasn't solving that problem. It was just, it was the perfect place for somebody like me who's been all over the world trying to solve problems, but I had actually it wasn't a career move. It really was. It was supposed to be a placeholder for me. But I found when I got to it that I am the quintessential problem finder. And it really built and designed REF, which was really a great organization, to actually invest more time and energy in sourcing problems off the battlefield to increase the speed and tempo by which we solve things rather than just delivering products. So it really became a problem generating organization. And we use those problems to then attract other people across the services and in the commercial community actually to provide solutions in real time to the things that we were anticipating on the battlefield. And quite frankly, it was everything from unmanned aerial systems to ground robotics to traumatic brain injury monitoring systems to clean energy on the battlefield. You name it, we probably touched it over a period of time. And so it really was cathartic for me, I think, to be able to see the dynamic of the world change, where the battlefield is working at a speed today that we never realized. And you're watching the same thing play out in Russia and Ukraine right now, is how fast that fight changes. And clearly the Russians were not prepared for what would happen. But that's what we saw in Iraq, and it's what we saw in Afghanistan.
So what was your process of identifying a problem? Because if I can maybe bring back in what you mentioned up front, which was mission, right? So mission-purposed entrepreneur. So an entrepreneur is kind of like what I'm hearing from you is when you were at the REF and leading the REF, it was kind of like you were finding a problem that needed to be solved, and it was almost unstructured. So what I'm curious to get a double click from you on is what is your decision-making process around deciding which problem is worth solving?
So the whole process, starts with what we call problem sourcing. It's just in mass sourcing problems. It's a social skill, not necessarily a technology thing. Is you got to have people forward on the battlefield or in the business world. You have to have them out with customers, and here's where customer discovery comes in really handy, because the art of doing customer discovery also helps you with problem sourcing. But if you're out on the battlefield where the problems are happening and talking to people in real time, they'll tell you things that they will not put in a report or they will not think about later on. So it has to be in real time. So the first thing I'd always say is we had to be present where the fight was to ensure that we had an idea of what was coming off the battlefield. And what I found is the longer we did that, the better the forward deployed people I had got at anticipating not just the current problem, but the next problem and the next one, because they could get a sense of what was going on around them. We also built networks of people who would tell us things, not just from the forward line, but from the commercial world and from senior leaders and for others. And it really was just it's like doing business intelligence, but it was focused on problems. We wanted to hear what people were doing. It brought all that data together. And then created this process of curation, which meant that we manually condensed all those problems down, looked at commonality, and then built portfolios around it. And so I go back to the 2010 to 2013 timeframe. Over a 2.5 year period, we sourced 1,350 problems, and eventually curated them down into 7 portfolios. And so, for instance, at the time, in 2011, improvised explosive device attacks against dismounted squads was a big deal. Wasn't recognized anybody, but they went from a couple of attacks a month to over 900, which is a significant spike, and that happened over a period of 5 months. So the portfolio said, find technologies that counter improvised explosive device attacks against squads. That portfolio had 132 separate problems layered underneath it. And so I didn't necessarily have to precisely attack every single problem as long as I was working on the portfolio. We would eventually start 360 projects and put them into discovery, which is the heart of what Lean does. And then eventually deployed 115 solutions to the battlefield, 20 of which became programs of record. So things you see being used in Ukraine right now, for instance, if you're familiar with Switchblade, Switchblade is the drone that flies and blows up on its end. Switchblade is one of those projects that we inserted in Afghanistan in 2013. It's now being used on another battlefield at scale.
So I'm curious, Peter, how did you approach? I know you put it into portfolio streams, if you like, but going back to the kind of context or the relationship or similarities rather between entrepreneurship or business, building a business and the military, risk management's like a key thing, right? So obviously there's lots of projects that you identified, and if they're falling into streams or programs, if you like, and in business, there's also lots of potential projects also bucketed into, streams. So how did you approach, risk management? Because I think as a CEO, founder, most of the time, especially once you're at a survival stage, it's actually about figuring out how to manage risk. And with only so many hours in a day and potentially with only so many resources, you need to figure out how to prioritize. So what is your advice or what did you learn, in fact, going back to the REF, in terms of risk management and project prioritization? How did you figure all that stuff out? Because if you got that stuff wrong, the consequences could be really, negative.
So I will tell you, even today, BMNT probably spends 50% of its time with our large enterprise clients, help them sort through how to do that. Yeah, and I give you the 2 things that we do most. One is we are confronted with the speed of time. Time is the challenge. So to put it this way is we're challenged by how long it takes us to recognize that there's a new problem or new opportunity on the battlefield of a business. We're then challenged by how long it takes us to articulate that in a language that other people can understand. Because I'm after a network now. I'm trying to attract bright people and other things to it. So if I can't explain it and I can't get people excited about it, I can't draw the right people into it. And then I'm challenged by how long it takes me to down select and agitate the right people to work with me as a team to do the discovery we need to develop a product, a better understanding of the problem, and a pathway to deliver it. And then we're challenged by how long it actually takes us to incubate that solution and get it back into the hands of people. As a process of curation and building a pipeline, too often people fail to meet the standards necessary to move something forward, and they just let it go. So if I let something move forward in my pipeline without the right team ready and without the ability to agitate and down select people and without a right understanding of the problem, I'm clogging my process with stuff that's not ready yet. So first is, risk management and prioritization becomes not just a discussion of what's most important, but it's also about what's most ready. I worked on things that were important that I could not get anybody's attention to. And what I would find is the tech is too far out. The tech would change too fast. My problem wasn't articulated correctly, or it was an emotional thing and not something that people would really work on. So the speed thing really gets you to think about what it takes to actually get something done and help prioritize in terms of what's ready to get on your platform when you do things. That's the first one. The second part of risk management then becomes how you define risk. In most big systems, risk is a determination of efficiency. I have to perfectly deliver a solution to something that's going to grow versus the risk of not delivering something in a timely manner to get the feedback you need to pivot into something that is actually going to grow. At REF, we used to say that the first best, fastest, most adequate solution to the battlefield wins. Because it's not until I deliver something in somebody's hands that I start having an honest discussion about what the problem was that I needed to solve. So risk became a time-based thing. If I'm not fast enough, my problem will change and the dynamic will change and I'll never catch up. Or I'll deliver solutions that are obsolete the day they show up on the battlefield. And that happens to businesses all the time. If you're behind the herd or behind the power curve, you don't keep up because you're trying to be too efficient with the use of your resources. That takes to trade time against efficiency. I call it effectiveness against efficiency over time. Takes an entrepreneur's mindset. Entrepreneurs do that for a living. They know how to manage risk. They know the potential for catastrophic failure, and they have I call it the personal fortitude and the mindset to deal with the stress that comes with that.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. I actually had Leif Babin on the show, and if you know him, so he works with who's the other guy, the Navy SEAL he does a lot of work with, wrote the book Extreme Ownership. Yeah. So he was explaining to me, which I found fascinating. You spoke about speed and effectiveness. So the Navy SEALs, Leif was explaining to me. He said that the SEALs, when they get on the ground, let's just say in Afghanistan or what have you, they don't actually have a formalized plan. So what they do is they go to the person in command on the ground, the head of what the hell's going on, the guy with all the information, and they'll say, what do you need? What do you need us to do? And then based on the requirement, they will then mobilize around that particular, issue or challenge that they may be having on the ground. It could be like, snipers in this building, clearing out this thing, whatever the case is. And I found that quite a fascinating story because you would think that, the Navy SEALs will have it all worked out, you know what I mean? But they do in terms of capability, but on the ground, to your point around speed and effectiveness, it's very agile in terms of their approach.
So Yeah, I would take it one step further. The other thing, and I came out of the Ranger Regiment, so as a special operator for a period of my life. The other thing they are particularly adept at doing is in first contact, things start to change. So they start based on a requirement, but as soon as they recognize the signs that things aren't what they thought they were, they are particularly adept at abrupt and efficient changes to attack the thing that they're presented with. Not much different than what an entrepreneur does as they're trying to take a product to market. They spend a lot of time testing the market, and they retain the agility because they're highly efficient and effective at the basic movements of what they do, that they can change direction on a dime. And it's that speed to market, speed on the battlefield that absolutely makes the difference.
Yeah, it does. Maybe if we could change gears, what exactly does BMNT stand for?
Begin Morning Nautical Twilight. So it's a weather term.
It's a weather term? Okay, yeah. I actually thought that was a military term.
It's a weather term.
Okay.
Yeah. Somebody said it's the founders, right? Bill, Mike, Nancy, and Tom. No. BMNT is the time in the morning before the sun comes up when you could first start to recognize shadows on the ground. And as a military term, we go back to the French and Indian Wars in the United States, where at BMNT, when you can recognize shadows on the ground, is when the Indians would be creeping up to the forts to do their attack, because they can make out the shadows on the ground and they can move. If you're the French sitting in the fort, and when you can see the shadows on the ground, that's when the Indians are sneaking up on you, you have to be completely ready for the next attack to happen. So BMNT, depending on which side of the wall you sat on, for the Indians, it was the best opportunity to get close. For the French, it was the worst time of the day because they knew the attack was coming. Technology today presents us with the same problem. Tech can be your best friend or it can be your worst enemy, depending on where you sit on the delivery of it. So we took a military term that we grew up with, which said you have to be constantly vigilant and ready for what tech is going to do to you. At the same time, you have to be able to use it to your best advantage as far as you can see the glimmer of the shadows of what it can do. And so BMNT sits in that space, particularly with large organizations, to helping them position themselves so that they can do both at the same time.
How important, in your view, is technology, and let's just say, I'm going to go purely into the business space now, but in terms of business model innovation, do you, in your experience, and I'm happy for you to draw a reference from the US military in terms of how they use technology, because the US military is effectively a business with a business model underlying the thing, partnerships, technology, blah, 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 networks, customers, and technology, on face value, if you look at the drones, flying over the Ukraine or whatever, it's like it's hardcore military technology. It's not available to you on your smartphone as much as it would be a great thing to have some kind of like hardcore military tech on there. But the perception, what I'm trying to say, Peter, is the perception is that US military technology is essential in the enablement of their effectiveness. In business, I was speaking to Alexander Oderwalder this morning, and he was saying that for him, business model in the business space purely, technology is overrated. So I'm curious to get your view. How important is technology in enabling a business model for the US military and or in business in your case?
So I trend towards Alex's definition, and I'd say it's overrated. The thing all military struggle with is, we'll call it business model innovation, is how to apply the technology. Technology is no problem. We have tons of technology. And I can give you an example. Switchblade is an example of something I did 10 years ago that's just now being employed by the military at scale. I can also tell you that I put my hands on the first quadcopter UAS systems in 2012 in a U.S. company that will eventually, obliterated in the business world by DJI. I was doing battery powered clean energy 10 years before they actually effectively employed it as something. There was no reason that any of those needed to wait 10 years to be employed, except that the military did not have the business model or the operating plans to integrate the technologies into the battlefield and their formations at the speed at which they needed to. And you watch, the Ukrainians, look at what they're doing today. They're taking on technologies that the Ukrainian military could never afford to have. And they're getting it from other countries. They're learning how to use it, and they're employing it directly into the fight as fast as we can think about it. So they're doing it in weeks and months, what sometimes we have taken 10 years to figure out how to do. It's not because we lack the tech. It's because we lack the business model agility of how to apply the tech into our organizations and into our operating plans effectively. That's what slows us down.
And that's probably a similar constraint I would imagine with corporates, right? So
absolutely.
There's all this technology. How the hell do I implement this thing and integrate it into all aspects of the business? If you take something simple, well, not simple, but something like AI or ML.
Yep. So, I have watched, I've dealt with several large corporate clients that I felt were on a death spiral because they were unwilling to change their platform that was generating cash and disrupt themselves in order to take advantage of something. And what they saw is they were completely overtaken by somebody completely from left field, who wasn't wedded to having to sustain a legacy system that was decaying over time. And Steve Blank and I had this conversation all the time about whose job it is to recognize that a legacy platform or system or model is starting to decay and ensure that there are potential replacements for it being built for the company. And the challenge is we over-resource decaying things because they require more resources to prop up. And we don't apply enough resources to building potential replacement for them. Large organizations can't seem to do both at the same time.
Yeah. So curious then, how do you know when something is no longer fit? Because in the banking sector, it's amazing. If you take something like SWIFT, the exchange that essentially processes international transactions, like that technology is old. It's old. And yet it's still the backbone of, international payments. Using that as an example, but there's other technologies that are out there that are defunct. But it's difficult, especially when you're sitting in as a corporate executive, to turn something off because it's not as simple as just, it's no longer fit for purpose because it's going to affect, these 10 other downstream systems that affect all these other things. You know what I mean? So the bigger it gets, the harder it gets to turn off these over-resourced, defunct legacy projects, right? So how do you identify when it's time to move something?
So part of it is you have to have a subset of the organization that's constantly looking at things like that. In the Russians' case, when they got unplugged from SWIFT, they didn't have a response. So without something to pull off the shelf and apply, what do you do? In the military, we talk a lot about, even in REF, the things that I put on the battlefield all existed someplace else. And I merely found things that were sitting at rest on a shelf. They call it technological debt. Cobbled them together in a MVP and put them in somebody's hand and very quickly took the time and energy to build something. So if your organization isn't toying with, studying, and working on alternatives to even your flagship thing, if something happens to it, you really don't have an alternative yet to start over, which gives other people the opportunity to leapfrog ahead of you. In the case of SWIFT, you got to, every country in the world watch the Russians get unplugged from SWIFT. What do you think they're doing today? They're trying to figure out how they protect themselves if that ever happens again. Suddenly there's a brand new market, and it may be disruptive to the SWIFT system.
Yeah, well, this is what they're saying now. It's like, if I can't use SWIFT, I'm going to use other instruments, blockchain, crypto as an example. The stuff that's going on there, it's easy to monitor SWIFT, not so easy to monitor, a crypto transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, at the economic level, the North Koreans have been prolific for years at stealing crypto.
Mm.
They've been unplugged from SWIFT and the world's economic base for years. But they've managed to keep themselves afloat in large cases by learning how to work around the SWIFTism using crypto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to talk now about BMNT, but I have one more question about the military. So I know you were there for a long time, 3 decades. I know you have a silver star. I know you had a lot of learnings over that period of time. But what jumps for you? Like if you were to cast your mind back over that entire tenure for while you were in the military, is there something that jumps for you as a key learning, like something that came across on more than one occasion, or something that even just today is like, I would say that's what it is? Is there something key learning or insight about innovation in the military or just the military in general that you feel would be applicable to entrepreneurs today?
So I'll say it both ways. In the military, it's all about people. People are the key to everything you do. Your ability to find, acquire, train, and deploy a team and keep them at a high peak of state requires a lot of attention. It requires a lot of leadership to ensure that you stay that way. Some of the things I learned in the Ranger Regiment in particular was, it was full of really, really highly qualified people. And if you had a leadership job and you stumbled or you got hurt or something else, you were replaced by the next person in line who, quite frankly, was just as qualified as you to do the job. And it wasn't personal failure. It was about the mission. And if the entire organization is focused on the mission, then people swap in and out by placing the smartest, best person they can forward to do something, regardless of their age, their rank, their sex, or whatever else. It was all about the mission. Corporate world, I think, suffers from an inability to retain that focus. Their people skills get diluted, or they don't pay enough attention to it. I think the mindset of an entrepreneur that I discovered in Silicon Valley and towards the end of my career is something that has been a part of the military forever, but has never been nurtured as a profession in the military. That's one of the things we're working on now is how to help the military nurse that entrepreneurial spirit as a profession and how to hang on to people like that.
Yeah, it's if you find them, you have to hang on to them. So finding them is one thing, hanging on to them is a whole other thing I've found.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of leadership, because obviously even in the context of corporate innovation, leadership or innovation has to be brought into at an executive CEO, C-suite board level in order for the thing to work. That's almost like a prerequisite. So in the military, obviously great leadership is worth, you can't even put a value on that. What is the role of how would you characterize what a great leader looks like now in a modern business and military environment?
I think the word that comes to mind is the champion. The leader has to be the champion of both the mission of the organization, but also of the people in the organization who are, and I'll just stick to the entrepreneur role, is they have to champion the entrepreneur's passion and harness that for the better of the organization. So sometimes that means pushing them really hard, and sometimes that means clearing a path for them. But most often it means taking what they learned from, I call it the reckless abandon and damage that entrepreneurs do, and harnessing that to make their organization better. Yeah, I never realized it was happening to me, but I was blessed with an opportunity to see some of the absolute best and absolute worst leaders in the military, and I worked for both. I worked for Stan McChrystal, Kearney and Vines, and some guys who were well known in the military, Petraeus, who are the gold standard of really calm, dedicated leaders that you want to work for. In the business world, if you don't recognize as part of your job as a leader to harness the passion of those young folks and sort out who's actually an entrepreneur and who's not, then you're going to lose them. And unfortunately, in the military, they lose them in droves. Because somebody figures out that they're a great entrepreneur, they get so tired of fighting the bureaucracy and not being given the tools they need to do the job that they quit. And they go to the corporate world and, they do great things.
So can I go back to that entrepreneur spirit story? Because, for me, it's like, I also I care about, growing entrepreneurs. It's why I do this show, because obviously, the more entrepreneurs you can build or create or inspire, or whatever the case might be, the more businesses they might create, the more employment they might create, the greater difference their products and services might make to humanity, right? That's kind of my story and my space. And this idea of entrepreneur spirit has come. I used to do innovation consulting, about 7-8 years ago, and Standard Bank, massive bank here, 10,000 staff, blah blah, and they were talking about entrepreneur spirit and how do we get the spirit or the entrepreneur spirit into our workforce. And I never quite understood the way that they were trying to enable that, because it was almost lip service, like, oh, it's an entrepreneurial spirit. If we can foster it in the bank, then great, But I'd love to maybe get you to try and take a stab at demystifying what that means, because what is an entrepreneur spirit? What does that practically mean? If you were to meet him or her or Joe or Greg, and they sat down in front of you, how would you know that person has an entrepreneurial spirit, number one? And then number two, if you meet someone that doesn't have one, how do you encourage it?
And so, it's interesting. It's probably a really long response.
Go for it.
I teach an entrepreneurial course at Stanford with Steve Blank and several other people. It's called Hacking for Defense. And it's a derivative of the lean startup class that he was teaching years ago. So we take problems out of the government and we get teams of students to self-form and take on the problems and come to the class as teams like a new company, and we're going to set out to solve those problems. And we're teaching right now. So we teach in the spring. I've got 32 students. Yeah, and out of the 32 students who are really working hard, and 8 teams will produce, fantastic, business intelligence around a problem. A couple of teams will actually form companies at the end of the class. Out of 32 students, there are probably 4 who I would call dyed in blue entrepreneurs. So the answer to your question is, you can't look at somebody's resume and say that's an entrepreneur versus somebody else. You really have to see them do work, not as an individual, but as a team. So the challenge in the military they're starting to figure it out is you can't figure out if somebody is good at doing something or has the natural talent for it unless you give them experience doing it. So if you don't professionalize the pathway that says, I'm going to introduce you to lean methodology, to agile, to design thinking, to all these tools, and then I'm going to give you things to work on over time. And over time, we're going to sort out whether this is a natural passion for you. And I find that, the one thing that really separates entrepreneurs from everybody else is the risk thing. An entrepreneur is willing to personally take on the risk of being wrong because they see the experience of being wrong at something as growth. And it's how they learn to do the right thing over time. Other people just can't get there. They see wrong as being devastating. So I can look at a group of students and say, these are entrepreneurs. These are people who will support entrepreneurs. And these other people, they're really gifted and focused on working things that are in a more constrained environment. And that's what they're good at doing. I think it's a mistake to try and take somebody from that environment and turn them into an entrepreneur.
Yeah, totally.
It just doesn't happen. It's a natural progression, I think, that you have to get through. But it requires a bit of design to create that professional process of turning them into that. The military has a process like that for growing non-commissioned officers. So how do you take a private and turn them into a sergeant and eventually into a platoon sergeant, eventually into a command sergeant major? Well, You start with hundreds of thousands of privates, and eventually you end up with like 50 command sergeant majors. And there's a progression over time of how you train them and then select them and then grow them and give them the experience they need to figure out how to do it. And oftentimes they self-select out and say, that's not me. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really landed for me in terms of, your answer there was around the risk piece, because, if you're going to join the military and you're going to go to the front lines, you're pretty much putting it all on the table, right? You're prepared to lose it all for a greater cause. It's exactly what a founder does on day one. He's prepared to lose his shirt for this problem or for this cause. The only difference being there's no bullets, different context, but it's very much the same. It's almost, I think entrepreneurial spirit and entrepreneurial mindsets are basically the same thing. It's the mindset of I can change the way things are because it sucks, or we losing men and women on the front line, and that sucks. So I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to take the building. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
It's that.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
People talk to me, and it's a student thing comes up a lot. And in the corporate world, people say, well, we're going to do a pivot. And I look at the team and I say, listen, if there's nobody in your team throwing up in the corner because they're so stressed out about this pivot, you're not doing a pivot. Sustainable change. It's not real. Because, it sucks. It's hard internally, it's hard externally to make the types of decisions as an entrepreneur that are really leap ahead things that are going to get you someplace. Same thing happened on the battlefield is, when it says all or nothing, take the building, somebody's making that decision, and it's gut wrenching to say, this is the building that we're going to all or nothing on. You only do that so many times before you start losing people. Mm-hmm. So either you win them all, or eventually you're the lone survivor at the end of the process. And that happens with startups. The same thing is, if you can't make hard decisions or you make them poorly, you'll eventually be the lone survivor in your company because there's no money left for you to hold on to other people.
Yeah, exactly. Well, everybody else has to go and get a JOB. Meanwhile, you can go and start another company. And then the process kind of repeats itself, And
at the same time, if you're not willing to make those hard decisions, nobody's going to follow you. Yeah. They're going to follow somebody who will.
Absolutely. So speaking of students, keep coming up here. I've been reading about your Hacking for Defense, H4D is the acronym on that. So it's a university course sponsored by the Department of Defense. Fascinating. What is H4D? What are you covering there? And who is this all for?
So as I mentioned, Hacking for Defense is primarily a graduate level course that takes emerging problems out of the Department of Defense that they need solved, and they need a different mindset to look at. The course is designed to teach entrepreneurship in the public service space to really bright young students and give them experience working with the government, experience working with the military, while also teaching them the principles of entrepreneurship focused on solving a real problem for a real client that gives them real experience that helps them get real jobs. The course now, we actually prototyped it at Stanford in 2015. In the United States, it was taught in 60 universities in the United States this year, 12 more in the United Kingdom, and I think 4 in Australia. Hacking for Defense has expanded beyond DoD, but there's a Hacking for Homeland Security program. So the Federal Emergency Management Agency uses it. The Transportation Security Administration uses it. The Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity Agency uses it in the United States, but they have their own courses in the U.S. In the UK, there is one working with police. There's one working with the National Health System, and there's one working on sustainment. And then of late, we have an impact program that is running a series of climate-based programs. So I think 8 universities this year are teaching hacking for climate, focused on different climate-based problems. All of them take the principle of sourcing a problem out of the world and using the principles of entrepreneurship to actually prove that we were working on the right problem and get the problem right. Build potential MVPs of solutions to those problems, and then build MVPs of pathways by which you can deliver that. And that's the goal. The goal is to get young people involved in public service, teach them how to be entrepreneurs, and in some cases, actually produce solutions to the problem. The Hacking for Defense program alone, over 8 years, has produced 52 new companies.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
So this is almost like, if I were to use the analogy of, exploit and explore, something I learned this morning from Alex. But in the US military, they're exploiting whatever they do, right? So then you've got explore, which is kind of like, hey, these are new things that we need solved so that we can remain relevant and competitive in the way that, the US military expects. So is this a way of the US, DOD, et cetera, of engaging with almost like a startup ecosystem to help them solve these emerging problems that they face? Is that a good characterization?
I think that's a good generalization. I go back to the explore and exploit model of we're using the process of sourcing problems out of the government and the prioritization of those as a model of exploration. And the exploit comes down to, that's a great solution. We have a champion for the problem in the government who has funding and authority and wants to take it on. And now we're rapidly moving in the right direction, whether it's a tech issue or a policy issue or something else. The ecosystem that has grown up around the course includes, quite frankly, all of the universities who are teaching it, all of the professors who teach it, all of the industry mentors, and we have, and people are all giving up their free time. Investment brokers, we have managing partners of investment companies, we have senior folks from defense companies and from startups and others who are involved working with the teams on a daily basis. All as part of this really rich ecosystem. 60% of the students who go through this course continue to work with the government afterward, whether it's passively or actively on the problem they were working on. So the level of engagement is extremely high across the entire ecosystem. So, over 8 years, we've sourced thousands of problems, and that's a really interesting database all in itself. But we've also produced thousands of students and thousands of mentors and professors who all get the language of mission-driven entrepreneurship focused on national public service, whether it's for the military or homeland security or climate or something like that. It's this massive pool of talent that we can draw on now to do other things.
That for me is fascinating. Probably one of the most fascinating things I've heard, because you don't think that would happen, to be honest. Like, if from the outside you would think, public sector closed, US government, you know what I mean? It's like you have to be in order to work on the problems. It's fascinating to know now that that's actually completely wrong as a perception. And that, this is all about tapping up that knowledge capital across universities, of which there is a lot, to solve these kind of amazing or challenging problems. But at the same way, as you mentioned, building companies off the back of the 52 companies that have been founded and that are built to some kind of scale is truly remarkable.
Yeah, I think the 52 companies are amazing. And we consider that a byproduct of the course. What we really wanted was to get, young people into the government or into other companies who, when they had the opportunity, would come back together to work on things that were important to the country or to their country or to, something like that. The critical part of this is what they learn in the Hacking for Defense, Hacking for Homeland Security, Equipment course is a common language for entrepreneurship in the government space, which is, culture driven by common language. So if you want this culture of entrepreneurship to exist inside the government and where the government overlays with business, You have to start by teaching people to speak the language. Think about it, all those students who have graduated and gone on, whether they're at Toyota or Tesla or a startup someplace or in the government, all share a common language and a common framework for problem solving and entrepreneurial methodologies for building solutions to problems. And it's a very unique asset that we can now apply, not just nationally, but worldwide.
Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. Very quickly, cognizant of time, Pete, H4X Labs. What is that, and how does this all play out in the public and the private sector?
So H4X Labs is technically known as an early stage tech accelerator. But more importantly, the first team to lead the Stanford Hacking for Defense class that started a company. It's called Capella Space. And Capella is an amazing company now doing synthetic aperture radar imagery from low Earth orbit satellites. The CEO of Capella came to me, after he raised his Series A round, and we were having a conversation about, what he learned in the class that he still does in the company. And I asked him what we could have done better for him. And he says, quite frankly, you guys suck. He goes, I left, it was hurtful. He says, I left this amazing class where I had mentors and I had focus and people at me, and I knew the defense space. And as soon as I graduated and I started the company, I had nothing. There was no place I could go to that continued that process afterward. And he looked at, quite frankly, I was sitting at BMNT and he saw him and he said, BMNT is the only place you go where that could have continued. And he says, so if you do something, you need to figure out how to come up with a part 2 of that course that helps people turn into real companies. We heard that over and over and over again. So we very quietly launched H4X Labs initially to help transitioning students who were leaving the course and turning into companies. Because you can take 4 people who were students one day and say, ta-da, now you're a company and the government wants to write you money and they're investors. And, that's really a tough space to be in. So we started there, and then as folks in the government started coming to us, they said, we have this problem with our SBIR, STTR, which are the ways the government engages companies, and we're not getting enough out of the program. We could take some of them on. And then, just a chance meeting, I ran into some folks in Norway one day who said, we have fascinating companies in Norway that have commercial applicability and military applicability who we think would be value added to, working in the United States and we could grow dual solutions. So we created this Allied program, which is an accelerator that takes shared problems in national security, looks for companies in other countries that have promising technologies, and actually puts them through a multi-month process of turning them into a better company, helping them understand the problem better, but also introducing them to the folks in the United States who would take them on, whether it's investors or the government or something on. We've run that with the Norwegians twice now. We just started, we're looking at the 3rd year. We're going to take on some Australian companies this year. And we're having a discussion about doing the same thing in India. H4X Labs, I think we worked with somewhere between 50 and 60 companies this year in that process. We've also run a strategic investment program for the government where we actually invested in terms of $1 million into emerging companies to actually build better products. So it was actually a contract to a company to build a better product that helped them raise their specter in the investment world so they could attract more investment dollars commercially. So for $20 million in U.S. money and government money applied to 20 companies, they've now raised in excess of 200 to 300 million over the course of the year. So H4X Labs really has become the incubator for how to do that. Really focused on transitioning early stage companies, either coming out of academia, coming out of other companies, or coming out of other countries, to get them to the point that they're investable entities and interesting to the larger finance community.
So if let's just say, so I'm actually moving to the States in July, and let's just say, spitballing here, that you have a founder who loves solving problems, has great experience, mentors, blah 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 blah, great profile for someone who could fit into this program. Is it possible for someone like myself, or maybe another viewer or listener listening to us around the world, to get access to that inventory and say, hey, here's the problems that we once solved, go and take a stab at it? Is that something that's doable?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say we're all over the place. We have always worked in a distributed manner. So this isn't like coming to Y Combinator where a cohort that's rigid that produces something. We're really, the graduates of our programs go on to Y Combinator, but we're really interested in that early stage, messy ground of, do you have the problem right? Do you have the right team? Do you have the right technology? And then understanding what it takes to actually improve the technology, to improve the team, or improve the adoption of the team's solution to a point where it's interesting as an investment. And that's where we cut our teeth at.
Amazing. Thank you, Pete, for that. I have one more question for you. Why do you do all of this? Like, what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Problem solving. It really is. I was destined to become a general. One day I realized that if I continued on that path, I would be locked into a job that had nothing to do with entrepreneurship. So I retired from the military. That's why. And I realized while I was at REF that this is what I wanted to do. I don't want to run a large corporation. I like building things, and I like building people. So, I started BMNT with 4 people. BMNT is now 4 companies, with probably over 100 people between them. That's the goal. It's not just BMNT, but we built a nonprofit. We built another company in the UK. We're about to spin out an AI company. That's what gets me out of that. My drive, though, is focused on the world as a better place, though.
Yeah, I'm sure. Peter, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real privilege and honor having you on the show. I've got a whole new perspective now about the US and kind of the great work that you're doing there. So I will most definitely reach out to you when I'm on the ground there. I'd love to learn more about the program and hopefully participate. And for all of my viewers around the world who are listening and following us right now, get in touch with Peter, check out the BMNT website, check out the Hacking for Defense program, H4X Labs. And if you want to get involved, please do visit those websites, get in touch with Peter and his team. Alrighty. Peter, Peter, thanks once again, man. It's been a real privilege and an honor. Thank you, all of you, for sticking around.